Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Inequality Watch. Now, just to make it clear, this show is not just about pointing out the obvious, that our country's wealth inequality is staggering, but holding accountable the system that makes it worse. And nothing could be more indicative of how the system is rigged than what we're calling the Marie Antoinette effect. It's a reference to the famous French aristocrats whose tone-deaf attitude towards the poor fomented the French Revolution. And recently here in Baltimore, we had a perfect example of that same nonchalance, this time for one of the most flagrant purveyors of inequality, the Republican Party. That's because this week the party held a retreat in Baltimore that got big attention, mostly because the soiree was attended by President Donald Trump, who weeks earlier had called our city rat-infested and said no human being would want to live here. But there's another aspect of the Republican gathering that has gotten less notice, and it has to do with where it was held and what that location says about the gross inequality that defines this country. That's because the Marriott Hotel, where GOP leaders feasted and partied, is one of the worst examples of America's rigged inequality machine. The hotel itself is worth $155 million, but the property does not pay a single dime in taxes. That's right, one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in one of the nation's poorest cities pays nothing to support the community it exploits. Stephen, how is this possible?
Well, it's possible because long ago, leaders in the city decided the only way to develop Baltimore or to help Baltimore grow was to give tax breaks to wealthy suburban developers. And in the case of the hotel, the city negotiated a deal, which actually they had to pay $1 a year for 25 years, but allowed them to build this hotel and build out really Harbor East everywhere that kind of surrounds the hotel is a luxury development and not have to pay a single dime of taxes for at least 25 years, something called a pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes. But basically, it was basically saying you don't have to pay property taxes, meanwhile everyone else does, but not this particular property.
But it doesn't end there, because getting a big, fat, juicy tax break didn't make the owners of this facility more generous to its workers. In fact, just the opposite. Recently, The Real News covered a strike outside the hotel. Workers were seeking a living wage and health benefits, and they told stories of despair and hopelessness. Let's take a listen.
They're cutting our benefits, they're cutting a lot of things, like our wages is like, they say like, it's the maximum, we reach the maximum wages, like as a server I make like $7.47, like last 3 years, 4 years, something for 3-4 years. No increase.
How can it be that a company that makes millions of dollars is only paying $18 a year, especially when the jobs here are not fair jobs?
In fact, a Baltimore City Councilwoman held a hearing on the workers' plight, which also raised uncomfortable questions about the city's penchant for giving out tax breaks. Stephen, can you talk a little bit about that policy and how it's contributed to our city's problems?
Well, basically, the city has created a two-tiered tax system, and this is all because Baltimore City has been isolated economically by a decision years and years ago to make Baltimore not part of the surrounding jurisdiction. So all the wealth created basically stays outside the city. And for the city to lure it back in, they basically have to say, you don't have to pay taxes. And so they've created this system where they have a series of tax breaks. Some are called TIFs, which is tax increment finance. Some are pilots. But the bottom line is it's tax breaks for wealthy, white, suburban developers who get to build very expensive buildings on the taxpayer dime, but keep all the profits. There are about 3 major cities that have a population over 500,000. One of the other is St. Louis, that aren't integrated politically into the surrounding counties. And that has created extreme economic isolation for Baltimore. We have double the tax rate of the surrounding counties. And what that's really allowed is for this type of system to take hold in the city, where one group of people, very wealthy developers, pay almost no taxes, and everybody, all the middle and the working class people, pay exceptionally high taxes. So it's a two-tier tax system that has been spawned by inequality and by a system, again, which is emblematic of this building, that is really rigged to make the wealthy wealthier and keep the poor poor.
So a poor grandmother who owns a home on Pennsylvania Avenue can pay $3,000 a year in property taxes, but a $155 million hotel pays $1 a year?
Yeah, and what you brought up before is a very important concept that we should look at, because during the hearing, it was very clear that the owners of the Marriott, the people who the benefit of this public largesse, were extremely cruel to the workers. Let's listen to some of the testimony that they gave at the city council hearing now.
I worked all the holidays, but I didn't have any didn't get any holiday pay. I couldn't get health insurance.
In the whole time I've worked there, the company has never given me an opportunity to do special cleaning projects to keep my average hours up. In February of this year, both my wife and I lost our insurance when Amy dropped below the average of 30 hours for 2 quarters.
Marriott says that they respect our right to organize, but since we began organizing, Marriott has not been neutral. My coworkers were told to stop leafleting customers about our fight, although this is our legal right. 3 weeks ago, I was suspended and then fired.
So, Stephen, to be fair, the tax breaks that were given to the hotel were actually given by Democrats, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is the classic, as we said before, neoliberal policy. The idea that somehow conferring public resources to private firms is beneficial to the public at large. It is a classic Democratic policy that it probably is taken home mostly in cities like Chicago and Baltimore, places that Republicans really have very little control over. So it's both parties really in evidence of their own sort of inequality structure and inequality policies can be seen in this hotel and the surrounding area.
That's what's so interesting about the hotel and the controversy that surrounds it. While Democrats like to align themselves with progressive values, they often default to the same tax breaks for the rich formula touted by Republicans. And it's that hypocrisy that leads to the kind of systemic inequity in cities like Baltimore, where working class people pay exponentially more taxes than the owner of a luxury hotel. It's also the same sort of thinking that leads Democrats to offer neoliberal so-called moderate solutions to problems that are rooted in the country's massive imbalance of wealth. Consider the favorite mantra of the mainstream media about how Medicare for all will take away people's private insurance. It's a question continually floated at the Democrats' debates, and it's a notion several candidates embrace, but it's also misleading and a categorically false premise. If Medicare for all is implemented, then what we would be losing is the greed of private health insurers and the prospect that a person can be cut off from access to health care just by losing their job. That's it. However, the demise of private insurance would mean big losses for the mainstream media and the politicians they support. Stephen, why doesn't anyone call BS on this fake dilemma?
Because I think the system has been so corrupted by money. You know, that private health insurers make $22 billion a year in profits, and they spend it and they give it to politicians, and they spend it on media outlets like CNN. And so the entire system is infused with the profits from health insurance. So they are just dissuaded from critically asking questions about it, and then they float these fake questions that make them seem like, you know, we're really objective. We're going to float this fake question. We're going to take away your private insurance, and it's just absolutely like a false dilemma. So I think it's just because the system has been incentivized for that kind of behavior, and it favors the mainstream media and it favors the politicians who are in power.
Didn't Jake Tapper of CNN and Senator Bernie Sanders kind of get into it over the healthcare question? Because I think Senator Sanders considered it a Republican talking point, right?
Yeah. I mean, he did the same kind of false, fake question, and then I don't want to use the word fake, but question that was misleading in its characterization of the. And Bernie Sanders pushed back and said, you guys have all this health insurance and this healthcare advertising, so you are bought into the system, and Jake completely ignored it.
Right. And you know what? Why don't we take a listen to that clip?
And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. At the end of the day, and by the way, the healthcare industry will be advertising tonight on this program.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warren, it's your turn.
Oh, can I complete that, please?
Your time is up, 30 seconds.
They will be advertising tonight with that talking point.
Senator Warren.
So this is the bottom line. A hotel that doesn't pay taxes or fair wages, and an elitist media that asks misleading questions about healthcare. It all leads to the same thing, a system that lavishes benefits for the few and deprives basic needs to the many. That's why we didn't just post a story on Trump's visit or focus on one of his tweets or his outright lies. That's because inveighing against Trump's illogic does nothing to call attention to the policies that actually affect our lives. If we want living wages, health care, and a criminal justice system that is fair and unbiased, we have to take a hard look at how the system as a whole distorts the truth and makes it all seem unachievable. We have to understand how the incentives baked into the system benefit both Democrats and Republicans alike. But most importantly, our job as journalists is to continue to shed light on these inconsistent, unfair, and unjust policies. It's a mission we take seriously here at The Real News and the sole focus of our show, The Inequality Report. So please make sure you like and subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and maybe even consider donating. It is critical to our mission that we have the support of viewers like you. And if you have a story that you want us to investigate, please reach out to me at Tejas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. I want to thank my co-host, investigative reporter Stephen Janis. And I want to thank you for joining me at the Inequality Watch.